Hello, Australia. This is episode 3 of the Layback Podcast. This podcast was filmed, and you can find it over on YouTube or through the links on thelayback.com. In this episode, I sit down with Simon Carter of Onsight Photography, a name many Australian climbers would be familiar with as it appears on the bookends of many an Australian climbing guidebook. Since the early 90s, Simon has been producing climbing photography and is described by the editor of Rock and Ice magazine as arguably the greatest climbing photographer of all time. Simon took a chance on the climbing photography career path, not knowing where it would lead, and he's worked immensely hard in pursuing that dream. Let's get into it. What attracted you to photography in the beginning?
Well, as a 15-year-old boy, I was very attracted to photography because, my thoughts were that photographers had the best jobs in the world, which involved traveling the world and going to exotic islands and photographing beautiful models on the beach. And that was my 15-year-old's sort of impression of what photographers did. And I just thought that is got to be the best job. I want that. Been a little bit silly there, but that was kind of the thinking. I just thought photographers had the best jobs and I just wanted to do that. And I also got really, quite young on, I got really into the creative side of it. Like I built a dark room in the laundry and then in the bathroom I turned it into a dark room and just started mucking around, taking photos, developing them, printing them. Somehow my parents tolerated me taking over the bathroom and doing all these silly things. And
Did it? I mean, that would have created quite a smell under the house, or
it was all right.
It was all right. What was the subject of photography like before you were taking climbing photos? What sort of things would you take photos of? People or places? Or?
Yeah, just kind of what I call sort of run-of-the-mill arty stuff. So I grew up in Canberra and I just walk the streets of Canberra and do time exposures and do architectural shots and then I'd sort of set up a little studio and do little portraits in the studio and stuff. And it was just dabbling with the medium really, and just sort of getting my head around how the medium worked and stuff.
And sometime after that, you discover climbing. How did that happen?
Yeah, so I really got into photography when I was 15 and then I got into climbing when I was about 17. And I ended up changing to college for the last 2 years of high school because that school, Narrabundah College, had a really good photography course with a really good reputation. And it was there at Narrabundah College that I got into climbing. We ended up, there was an outdoor education course and we ended up building a climbing wall on the outside of the gymnasium. And I was right next to the photography department, so I just basically lived there and we built this climbing wall. I mean, I probably need to bring it back a bit to when I was younger because it all sort of, climbing thing all sort of started for me when I was about 15 as well. I actually discovered a couple of books in the school library. One was The White Spider, which is the story of the first ascent of the north face of the Eiger. And the other one was Chris Bonington's Everest the Hard Way. So two like real classic mountaineering literature books. And those books just totally inspired me and I just really thought I want to do mountaineering. That is the ultimate sport or thing that you can do. It's like, to me, it was way more exciting than any team sport. And that's what I was really interested in doing. And I thought that to be good at mountaineering, you naturally have to be good at rock climbing. And so I thought, okay, I've got to get into climbing and get good at this. So anyway, we built a climbing wall on the outside of the gym at college there, and I actually discovered I wasn't very good at all. And I just found that really frustrating. I was quite skinny. My nickname was actually Skinny. And I thought because I was light, I'd actually be quite good at rock climbing, but I wasn't. And so I got really frustrated and I just poured a lot of energy into getting better. And over about the course of 6 or 12 months, I just gradually got better and I got more and more into it and obsessed by it. And then I just started bouldering at different places around Canberra. There's a place called Torrens Shops, a shopping centre. You could climb on the brickwork.
Okay.
And, I'd go there a lot, and I'd met other climbers from there, and some really good climbers from Canberra sort of saw that I was just super keen, and they just started taking me out climbing with them and took me under their wing. And I went from there.
Okay, so there was a bit of a scene going on at Canberra in that particular point in time. What was it like?
It was a really small scene, so really small. And if someone was keen, and I was young and keen, they kind of took you under their wing and mentored you, and it was awesome. They were so generous and helpful. And we'd go out to Broomba Rocks or on trips to different places.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were you taking photos of climbing at that point in time? Like, did they start to gel together then?
Yeah, they instantly sort of was one of the subjects I instantly started dabbling with. As soon as I got into climbing, I started photographing it. But I always dismissed it as anything that you could shoot seriously.
Okay.
I just thought, well, you just can't make a living out of shooting climbing photography. No one had or did in Australia at that point. So this is back in the 1980s.
Okay.
So I really just dismissed that idea.
Okay. But, I mean, you went on to study photography after school, right, at TAFE? Is that...
Well, yeah, TAFE was night school. So what happened is I finished year 12 and I instantly got a job, luckily, out of high school to... working at a couple of photography departments at the Australian National University. So my first job was in the prehistory and anthropology department. And I did that for 6 months. Then I got a transfer to the photography department at the Research School of Biological Sciences. So I basically worked at the university for about 2 years out of school, and I was doing a little bit of photography. But I ended up actually spending most of my time working in the darkroom. So like printing DNA gel smears, those little bands where the scientists would be comparing the DNA and stuff. Or I might be having to print electron microscope photographs. So really badly exposed negatives I'd have to turn into a usable print for the scientists for their research. And so while I was working there, I studied photography at night school at TAFE on the side. So basically, after about 2 years of working in the darkroom and studying photography at TAFE, I just became really disillusioned with photography, and I felt that what I was doing was never going to lead to the kind of photography that I wanted to do.
Like that vision you had when you were young of traveling the world.
Right. And here I am stuck in a darkroom. This is so far from traveling the world and shooting beautiful women that it's just not going to. This is just not going to work. And there's a little thing that happened at TAFE too that kind of was sealed the deal a bit for me, in that at TAFE we were given the opportunity we had to shoot a portfolio at the end of the year. And so I went, beauty, I'm going to shoot a portfolio of rock climbing images. And I went to a lot of trouble. Like I did some montages, I did some really arty stuff, and then I went out to Broomba Rocks and did the abseiling down and photographing the climbers thing. And I was like, it's a lot of work. And I handed in my portfolio of 12 photographs and I failed the final portfolio. But the folios that did really well were really cliched things like nudes on rocky beaches and just really arty stuff, or the classic kind of arty stuff. And I felt really disillusioned, like that the whole idea of what an arty photograph seemed to be quite restrictive to me, it actually felt really cliched, like a nude on a rocky beach. I mean, how unoriginal can you be, please? But that's the stuff that did well. So here I am, having gone to quite a lot of physical effort and not doing very well. I just thought, this is rubbish, I'm out of here. And so I saved up while I was working in that job, and myself and my friend Mike Law Smith, who was a really strong Canberra climber, we headed off to France climbing for I travelled around Europe for 6 months. We spent 2 months full-time climbing in France in 1987. Went to Buttes and Verdun and got exposed to this whole world out there of climbing. And saw Patrick Erlanger. I climbed with Dale Goddard and Christian Griffith and in the Verdon Gorge. And, I just had my eyes open to this amazing world of climbing. Yeah, so I came back to Canberra, to Australia after that, and just gave up photography and barely touched my camera for years.
Yeah, and you went to La Trobe to study outdoor education, right? And that, I guess, I'm interested to understand what was the driver there. How did you lead into that? Because it's a little bit different from photography.
Yeah, so having given up on photography, I basically went, well, what can I do? And I saw that I was really into the outdoors, and I really recognised the idea behind outdoor education, which, as you might know, is about taking kids into the bush and using activities like rock climbing, canoeing, bushwalking, cross-country skiing as a kind of medium for getting kids into the bush. And when you've got them out there, you can help foster an appreciation for the bush and for the natural environment, and do some environmental education, help with some personal development type stuff, personal responsibility. So I really believe in the idea of outdoor education. And
it was a big idea at that point in time, right? Like, I mean, it was kind of coming into its own. That was a new course, as I understand, relatively at La Trobe. Like, it was kind of a pretty popular movement at that point in time.
Yeah, it might have been fairly new, but it had a great reputation, that course. And I mean, I think now the concept is as important as ever, because, as a society, we're so disconnected from the natural world. We're sitting on our smartphones, or back then the concern was people were sitting inside watching television. Things haven't got any better, So we don't, generally as a society, we're not very connected with the outdoors, and so it's really important. And that was a brilliant course, and it was a 3-year degree course, and I did it, and I had my eyes opened. I learned a lot. There's a lot of philosophy in there, which I thought was really valuable and really important. It also taught me on a practical level how to balance up, doing trips and then writing assignments, which is kind of how it felt years later when I was doing my photography business. I'd do a trip and then I'd come back and have to balance that, and juggling those different things. So, yeah, it was a great course. I got a lot out of it, and I really believed in it. But towards the end of the course, I started to feel that for me, working with kids was probably not my thing so much. I actually have a lot of respect for people who are good at working with kids, teachers. Like, outdoor education, it's a 24/7 job. You've got a group of kids out on a school camp. You're responsible and looking after them 24 hours a day for the whole length of the trip. It's very stressful. It's really hard work. It's a lot of responsibility. And I had no connect in my mid-20s, I didn't really have a connection with kids. And so I kind of probably did well in identifying that in myself, and I didn't really seek out any work in that area when I finished the course.
Okay. And so if we just go back to your youth, did you have your own experiences with outdoor education or anything? Like, what was your exposure to the outdoors earlier on that kind of gave you an interest in that area?
Yeah, I was very lucky at high school and then at Narrabundah College afterwards with outdoor education courses and trips that we did at school. And when I was in year 9 and 10, I had a group of friends. There was about 5 of us, and we'd go off on bushwalks and do little mini adventures the whole time. Like, we'd go walking up on the main range, Kosciuszko main range in summer. And when we were 16, 5 of us flew down to Tasmania and we did the Cradle Mountain Walk. So a group of 5 of 16-year-olds just doing the Cradle Mountain Walk. And I look back on that and I think that was actually really cool that we did stuff like that. It's just, that was what we wanted to do, have these little adventures. And we all kind of had that mindset that I touched on earlier about how I wanted to do mountaineering. And I think we all recognised that outdoor stuff was sort of where it was at for us. So yeah, we really got into that, and so that was always sort of a part of me. And just that exposure to the outdoors. And Canberra is a brilliant place for getting into the outdoors.
And then, so getting back to La Trobe, you finish your degree, and then, but you don't go into outdoor education. I mean, it's kind of like a period of kind of unknowns for you. What do you do then?
Yeah, I did 1 day's climbing guiding. It's about the extent of the amount of work I did in outdoor education. Yeah. And I ended up back in Canberra, sort of living in Canberra, and I got work in outdoor shops. So I worked at Paddy Pallen's for 18 months, just on the shop floor. And then I got a job for 6 months to help set up a new outdoor shop in Canberra, managing that. But I kind of, during that 2 years that I spent in Canberra, I just really got into my climbing.
Yeah.
I kind of went, well, okay, so maybe outdoor education isn't my thing. Or photography is not my thing. But I just love climbing. And I just, in Canberra, we'd pop down to Nowra or pop down to Point Perpendicular or pop out to Baroomba. And so I just really got into my training and my climbing during that time. And I saved up a bit of money. And I just recognised that I really had this bug for climbing, and I really wanted to explore it and see where it would take me.
And it eventually took you to the Arapalis for a pretty big stint where you just focused on your climbing solely.
That's right. I saved up and I went full-time climbing for 8 months.
Yeah.
Spent most of that at Arapalis. I did a little 2-month holiday to New Zealand, to Painsford in the middle, but basically I set up at Arapalis. I got 2 tents and a massive tarp and a chair from the tip and made a little kitchen. And so this is back in 1992, 93. And back then there was just a fantastic scene at Arapalis. And if you wanted to be a good climber in Australia back then, that's what you did. You went to Arapalis, you hung out, you went full time. And it's the only way that you would do enough climbing to get really good. And it's different now, like you have the gyms, but in doing that full-time thing, you don't maybe climb as hard because you're not doing the same type of training that we have now, but you do the mileage. You're on the rock just covering so much ground that you actually get you develop your technical skills and your rock sense quite well. And so I did it and I lived it, and it was a fantastic time. There was such a good scene there. We're all little rebels, and it was cool.
It was cool. But when we were talking about it the other day, you kind of mentioned that in one aspect it was like being at rock bottom in a way. You're on the dole, you're living out of a tent, So there's this kind of side to it where it's very positive. You're out there climbing, doing what you want to do. But then this other tension there as well where, the way you're living, maybe it's not sustainable forever or...
No, it was never really going to be sustainable forever. And... I guess sometimes you just got to go for things and not really look at there's going to necessarily be something come out of it.
Yeah.
It's just I wanted to be good at climbing and I wanted to live it for a while. Yeah.
And you did get good at climbing, though. I mean, I've heard photos of Simon was so ripped when he was during that time. Like, have you seen photos of Simon, how ripped he was?
I was definitely ripped. I was definitely thin. I just wish I'd had a bit more power. So we'd had the training that you have now. It would have been really awesome. But yeah, it's all what you do is relative to the day. So it was cool. Yeah. I was happy with what I did and I lived it. And but there was no negative, like living on the dole. There was no shame in that, No. And I had some savings that I lived off. And it wasn't really rock bottom. I always knew if it didn't work out or whatever, I could always go back to Canberra and live with my parents. I kind of had that comfort, that safety net
to fall back on.
That's right. So I'm probably a little bit privileged in having that, to be able to dabble in my passion and stuff, which might have been a complete indulgence in many respects. It's not really adding anything to society, and you appreciate the government grant, the dole, for pursuing your passion, but it's not really leading anywhere, is it? So
no. But you picked up on photography again during that period.
Yeah, and so this is honestly what happened is, like, because climbing full time, you you can't climb. Well, I couldn't climb every day, and so I'd, have several rest days in a week, and on those rest days, it's like, well, what do you do? And I guess it started to click with me that a lot of my friends and people that I was climbing with were just really awesome climbers and doing really interesting stuff, and there was no one around documenting what they were doing. And we were climbing over on Taipan Wall a lot, and it's just like this most gobsmacking wall on the planet, and nobody's photographing it. And so I just started picking up my camera on rest days and taking photos. And I didn't have a lot of money to spend. This is back when you shoot film, and this is not cheap. And it just clicked with me as like, yeah, this is it. This is what I want to do. Climbing, it means a lot to me. I love it. No one else is shooting this. And I just felt like I'd found a kind of purpose with the climbing photography. And because I had nothing to lose, because, I didn't have to pay a mortgage. I didn't even have to pay rent at the time. It kind of felt like I had nothing to lose but to give it a go and see what could happen. And so the story is that I met a guy who ran it's called a NEACE course, a New Enterprise Incentive Scheme course, which is basically a government scheme at the time. I don't know if it still exists. And it's a scheme to get people off the dole and to start their own businesses. And so basically, if you've got a small business idea, you can do the course for 6 weeks. In that time, you do a lot of research and you put a business plan together. And so I did that course in Horsham, and they approved my plan. And basically what it does is it gives you the equivalent of the dole for a year, which gives you that opportunity to pursue your business. So I moved to Natamuck and I started my business. I got the grant, registered my business name, got a fax machine, and within about 3 months I published my first calendar, Australian Climbing Calendar, 1995. And some things in the business plan didn't work out at all, and other things went much better than I expected. And that calendar did really well, and it helped keep me going to the second year. And just one thing led to another and another and another, and things just, for the next many years, and probably still kind of happens in some ways, is things would come along just when I'd sort of despair and go, oh, this is ridiculous. Why am I doing this? I'm about to go broke. I really can't justify this. Something would come along, and opportunities just started opening up, and yeah.
And you managed to kind of build out a life and a business around it.
Yeah. And I was, a few years into it, I took a phone call one day from a publisher who was looking for a photo, and I couldn't help them, but I told them what I did, and I said, but if you wanted any climbing photos, I could help you. And they said, oh, that's interesting, because we want to do a book on Australian climbing. And I said, oh, that's interesting, because I want to do a book on Australian climbing. And, we had a meeting, and 10 months later we had a book at the printers. So,
and which book was that?
That's Rock Climbing in Australia.
Okay.
My first coffee table book.
Yeah.
So basically I actually moved back to Canberra to my parents, and I'd spend 3 weeks on the road travelling around Australia. Then I'd go back to my parents for a week, do stuff on the computer, editing slides, and then I'd head off again. And so in 10 months, intensely, I'd travelled to Australia and put the material together for that first book. And that book led to some awards and to an invitation from Rock and Ice to come and photograph American climbing, Rock and Ice magazine. And, just then I sort of was able to expand my photography from just shooting Australian climbing into shooting at different places around the world. And I managed to get it to work for quite a few years, where I travelled the world to different climbing locations, and I could publish calendars and books on the back of those travels.
Were you able to climb at the same time and fit that whole life alongside it? Because here you're going to all these amazing crags around the world. Did you actually get to experience them on your photography rest days?
Well, I got to experience the crags, because I think it would have been criminal to go to those places and not climb. And I always made it a point to make sure I got to climb just to experience them. But at the end of the day, when you've only got a couple of weeks to photograph a really major climbing area, you have to work your ring off to get the kind of type or quality of shots that I felt I needed or I wanted to get. So, yeah, I'd always climb, but it would always have to take a back seat to the photography.
How involved is it? Can you run us quickly through like the process for going out there and like capturing a shot? Because I don't know if everyone can kind of appreciate what really goes into some of these photos.
Well, there's different styles of climbing photography. So you have your fairly documentary stuff. Somebody's climbing a route and you just try and get in position in time and document it, like whether you give yourself enough time to get in position or you just snap it. So you've got the documentary style, but the more creative side of climbing photography is what really interests me and drives me. So the process for me for that often involves just trying to think the question I ask myself is, what would the ultimate shot of this climb or this area look like? So I try to envisage that in my mind, and what would the best possible thing be? And then I try to deconstruct that backwards and end up with a plan to be in the right place at the right time to capture it. So, it might be up on a big wall at dawn. So you figure out the logistics to make that happen and work it from there. And often it involves, going out, abseiling down in numerous places, looking through the lens to pick an angle beforehand. So you're not just doing it on the fly when the climber is going for it. You've got it figured out.
Is that like an analogy for how you've built up the business? Like you had this vision of what it would look like and then you kind of worked towards building that up? Or did the early vision differ greatly from what it looks like now? Yeah,
the business kind of grew a bit organically in its
own way.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, that original business plan, there was aspects that didn't go very well. In fact, my original business plan, I envisaged climbing would be one aspect of many adventure sports that I would photograph. So I'd be shooting skiing and, hang gliding, paragliding, whole bunch of different adventure things. And I did a little bit of that, but I quickly found that it was just a distraction from what I really wanted to do. And there was so much to shoot in climbing that I actually didn't have time to get distracted by the other stuff too much. And when I started traveling to shoot climbing, it's like, well, there's a whole world of climbing out there. And so I ended up a lot more specialized than I had originally intended.
What's the biggest epic you've kind of ever gotten into trying to capture a particular shot?
Well, there's been a few occasions when I haven't been very comfortable, but probably one that stands out is we were photographing in northern Spain at this cliff called Riglos, which is a 300-metre high conglomerate sort of bunch of domes. And the plan was that we climbed this 8-pitch route up one of the domes, and I was photographing a party to the side of us doing a route parallel to us, and Monique was my rope gun, and she would sort of lead a pitch, and then she'd fix the rope and I'd Jumar it, and then I was shooting the other team on the route next to us, and that all went very well. We made it to the top, and it was late in the day, sunset, and we got to the top, and the other party, who were a bit quicker than us, weren't there, and the plan had been to meet up on the summit to get off. And as soon as I got there, we realised why they weren't there is because you couldn't stand up. The wind, we'd been climbing on the lee side of the dome all day, and we got to the top and it was like this gale force wind and you could barely even stand up. It was so strong. So we had to find the abseil anchors and start abseiling. And we had to sort of do this it's probably only like 60 metres of abseiling to get to this saddle where we would be able to get protection from the wind, but it was just funneling through this gap. And we just had an absolute epic with the ropes and ended up doing this abseil in 3 sections. And every time we pulled the rope, we got more committed. And basically, we kind of thought we were stuck and weren't going to get down. But anyway, we made it. Here to tell a story. But it was a scare.
Yeah.
Just rope management in high winds and stuff. It was all a bit stressful. And I think I was probably a bit hypothermic and just not thinking clearly.
Yeah.
And I think if our rope had hooked up on one of the abseils, we would have been in serious problem. And I think back now and it's like, there are ways we probably could have done that better. But yeah, not many stories like that though, I'm happy to say.
That's a positive thing.
Yeah. I mean, I used to do stuff with my climbing photography, like when I was sort of fresh at it after doing a lot of climbing as a youngster, I'd solo up to the top of Taipan with a camera bag and a 60-metre static and a rack on up sort of the grade 8 access route. And there's no way I would do that now. So I just have to do things differently. I work with people, and it might be slower and stuff, but we set up the ropes in a lot more safer way than I used to.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess you've got the experience now to maybe know a little bit better, and you're a father now as well. So I guess does that change it a little bit?
Oh yeah, but almost it's definitely I want to be around to see my daughter grow up, but I also I'm older. I don't feel the need to take that risk. Yeah. It's not a necessary risk. There's enough necessary risk in climbing. You're often doing something that can go pear-shaped. So there's no need to take unnecessary risks. So yeah, I tend to play it a bit safe, and yeah, sure, people can take their own risks and make their own judgments, but you've got to do something that you're comfortable with.
Yeah. No, it's fair enough.
I find actually, on touching on that, this is a bit of a thing recently. I've been noticing a lot of people photographing soloing, and there's been a lot of promotion of that aspect of climbing, which wasn't around, I think, so much in the past. And over the years, I've really not photographed soloing so much myself. I have on occasion, but usually I've just stuck to things that are really easy for that person. Like it's something that they do as a matter of course for them. Like I photographed Peter Croft or Joe Croft doing Bard, stuff that they do every day before breakfast. Not sort of taking photographs where people are really pushing it. And I just don't feel that's the side of climbing that I needed to promote to make a successful business.
Do you feel that others are promoting it for that advantage?
Probably not, no. Okay. But they are promoting it.
Yeah. You don't see that necessarily as a positive thing?
I just don't see it as a necessary thing.
Yeah.
I mean, you can argue that it's just documenting climbing and it's a legit aspect of climbing, but as soon as you are there with a camera, you are influencing that person's decision to solo, unless they don't know that you're there. So yeah, like the whole free solo thing with Alex Honnold, it's very interesting to me. It's been a fantastically received film, but I do have questions about the whole ethics of the whole thing. So that's just my personal feeling about it, and I think you've got to be aware when you're in the media or documenting thing about the ethics of what you're doing and the influences you might have.
One thing I wanted to touch on was technology. It's impacted life, like just in general, significantly since 25 years ago when you first started Onsight. I guess I want to get your viewpoint on how's that changed climbing media and climbing photography, those improvements in photographic technology and changes like digital.
Yeah, so there's a couple of major things there. Obviously, digital cameras changed the game massively. Because I used to shoot on film, and it was probably each photo you took would cost you about $1. So if you weren't very good at nailing your exposures straight up, without being able to preview it, then you weren't ever going to be successful. So that was just basically a hurdle. And you had to know what you're doing to be able to nail exposures.
So for the less techno-apt out there of us, did the older cameras have just like an auto setting where you could click a button and it would automatically do everything for you? Or has that come a long way?
Oh, yeah, but the auto exposure would be constantly fooled. I mean, if the climber's on the rock there, but you've got a huge amount of sky in the photo that's going to influence the exposure, it's going to throw it out. So what I would usually do is I'd put it in spot meter mode, and I'd take exposure readings of different parts of the scene. And I don't know if you know about Ansel Adams, a famous landscape photographer from America. He invented this thing called the zone system, and basically you'd preconceived on what parts of the scene would get, where would they fit in the tonal range.
Yeah.
So by spot metering, you could sort of look at it and they go, orange rock on Taipan wall, I want that to be 2/3 of a stop overexposed. And so you'd meter it to that, and then you could point the spot meter around and just check that the other parts of the scene fell into the exposure where you would want them.
And I guess these days with a camera, you can take photos in a way where you can kind of select a setting, just click the button and then worry about that later on when you get to the computer, yeah?
Well, so now, okay, so with digital, you can take a photo, look at it, you can see the histogram, the scale on it, like seeing where the exposure's fitting on the scale from overexposed to underexposed, and so you can take a test shot, adjust your exposure, shoot again. But now, just in the last few months, I've just gone to a mirrorless camera. These just come out. So Nikon have released their Z6 and Z7, and I went for the Z6. And so basically now you're looking through the eyepiece and you're seeing a digital version right
then
through the eyepiece. So you can adjust your exposure before you even take the photo. And you can actually zoom in on your focus without having to take your eye away from the eyepiece, and you can nail your focus before you even take a shot. So it's awesome. And I was a very reluctant updater, to get into digital photography. It was only in about 2008 that I changed, and I waited a long time until the cameras got better and better to the resolution, and then I realized eventually the resolution of the digital had got so much better than film that I couldn't afford not to change. And although I kind of miss the color gamut that you get out of the film, it's still beautiful. The digital, the convenience, and the clarity, the resolution you get out of digital is just so much better. It was impossible to ignore.
So the barriers, I guess, for photography have lowered a lot since you first started. Now it's really easy for anyone to pick up, a $600 camera and have that technology in their hands. How has that changed drone photography? Or an iPhone even, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's changed massively. Yeah, everyone's a photographer now, so there really isn't a barrier of entry at all. I mean, or it's just minimal. And so coupled with that, of course, you've got the internet. So, and then you've got social media with, Facebook and Instagram and just everyone putting out. So now there's just a world of photographs out there, whereas, 20, 30 years ago, it was the amount of imagery being produced was very small, and the number of people who could consistently do it at a high standard was very small as well. So for me, there's a lot more competition in some respects. There's also more opportunities in some ways, more ways of getting your work out there.
There's drones as well too. I mean, you invest a lot of time in positioning yourself to take good photos of climbers from a particular angle. Have drones kind of impacted or brought more competition to that aspect of it as well?
Not for high-end stills photography. Not yet. I've not seen it. I mean, I've been dreaming about remote-controlled helicopters and years before even drones came along. Yeah. I just thought, when I'm retired, I'm going to pull up to the car park in my van and pull out my remote-controlled helicopter and fly that off and get my shots. But no, the reality is the drone. Like, I got a drone last year for the first time, and the main idea is for using it for guidebook photographs, for topo photos, and for video. It's fantastic for video, that movement, that bird's eye perspective. But for high-end still photographs, I'm not really seeing it threaten that yet. You really need to go to a much bigger, more elaborate setup to... drone photographs are horizontal in format, and for a lot of the photographs you might want to do with the stills, you might want to orientate it vertically in a portrait format. So unless you've got a really high-end drone, you're not going to get that for starters. Yeah. Then you've got things like you're not allowed to fly drones in the national parks or parts of the national parks unless you've got permission specifically. And a lot of people flaunt that law, but it's a fact. So for me as a professional photographer, it's not possible.
It's not possible, yeah.
I mean, I could try and get permission for specific shoots, but the hurdles are
huge,
quite significant, yeah. It's annoying. I don't know. It's just not there, and it doesn't give you quite the degree of control of being there. I sometimes go to really elaborate setups for my shoots, like rigging multiple ropes so I can get out from the cliff to get a really good perspective. But the number of times you really need to go that much trouble and not that often. It's more about thinking of clever angles, I think, and where you abseil down, and yeah.
Yeah, okay. So Talking about guidebooks, how did you get into guidebooks and making guidebooks?
Oh, it started nearly 20 years ago. A friend of mine asked for some help to distribute a guidebook he'd produced. And we worked together for a while, and then it became pretty quickly obvious that to produce a good guidebook to somewhere like the Blue Mountains, you needed to work with lots of different people because nobody knows it all. So I ended up working with a whole lot of different authors like Mike Law, John Smoothie, Glenn Short, Neil Doherty, and in recent years, people like Neil Monteith, Paul Thompson have been incredibly helpful. And basically, you need to get information from a lot of different sources, and a lot of people contribute just new routes or corrections and stuff, which we work with to turn it into a credible, authoritative resource for people.
What do you think makes a good guidebook?
Good guidebook. Well, obviously a good guidebook can help people maximize their time out climbing, like get the most out of an area, give them the most, take advantage of the opportunities that an area presents. Another purpose of the guidebook is to document and act as a record of what's been done over the years. There's a lot of work that goes into that side of it. But probably the most important thing is trying to convey information to help keep people safe. So obviously you've got the whole personal responsibility aspect of climbing. People have to take responsibility for themselves. A guidebook will never be perfect. People who even have a guidebook sometimes don't use it properly or take account of everything that's said in there. But there's a lot of things we can do in editing or authoring a guidebook to convey information that's really important to people and will help them with their safety when they're out on the crag.
Yeah, okay. What are your thoughts on climbing sites, such as the Crag Mountain Project, that I guess sometimes they can kind of facilitate the copying of guidebooks onto the web?
It's interesting you use the word copying because that has certainly happened, and obviously copying copyrighted material is illegal, and it leaves them wide open to legal problems. And I think like the Crag is a really useful resource, like it's a very valuable resource for me as a guidebook editor. And I've spent a lot of time comparing information on there to what we have in the guidebook. But I think there's real fundamental problems with the whole crowdsourcing kind of concept, because basically at the end of the day, there's nobody taking responsibility for the actual material that's on the website. I mean, that's in addition to the whole web versus print kind of different platforms, different mediums, because there's a lot of things we do in designing a guidebook, which is really good at conveying information. The web has some other advantages. Apps have even other advantages. But as to the information on some of those websites, no one's actually taking responsibility for it. So you end up with a situation where there's well-known death routes or really dangerous routes which have absolutely no warning on it. And to me, as a guidebook publisher or author, that would be completely unacceptable. And you just can't put something out there and not be covering really basic stuff like letting people know if a route is known to be dangerous or has had multiple people die on it even. Like there's a case at Mount York where routes, more than one person has died on it. And online, there's no warning whatsoever that it's a potentially dangerous route. We put a lot of effort into, with the guidebooks, we put a lot of effort into conveying information, like providing general safety information at the start of each section.
So you think it's important that people like actually sit there and absorb the information you guys have got?
That's right. You can't help people if they can't help themselves. People are going to use the guidebook and then have a little epic and then turn around and say, oh, I had a problem because I didn't take any bolt plates when the guidebook's told you to take bolt plates. Yeah, it's just, you just can't help people, but can you? But and no guidebook is perfect, no resource is perfect. People have got to take personal responsibility, but we go to a lot of trouble to make sure the information is as good as possible, and a lot of people contribute to making sure that happens.
So it's important for people to understand that information will have varying levels or degrees of quality depending on its source, and they should consider the source when they're actually taking it on board.
Yeah, I mean, by all means, get your information from as many different sources as possible, but the guidebook is by far the most reliable sort of source of information there is. It's not just information that's interesting to me as an author, not just routes that I've done, but when we cover an area, we cover all the routes and cover them as thoroughly and accurately as possible. We provide the access information, overview information, maps, because just using a GPS coordinate or a Google map doesn't often tell the whole story, and you can end up creating access problems. Like there's potential problems at a couple of different crags up here that are in the Blue Mountains been happening recently, and the information online is just wrong. So there's a lot that goes into producing a guidebook, and the more I've got into them over the years, the more responsibility I've felt, and the more I've got involved in issues like access and making sure, if an area is, shouldn't have people going to it, or it's on private property, or there's issues of any sort, I won't put it in the guidebook, or we make sure the information is really clearly comes across. So it's I find it a bit weird that online, just because it's online, people feel they can publish cliffs that are illegal or on private property, or might have access descriptions that are wrong and going to create access issues. So there's a real lack of responsibility. No one's looking after it.
You mentioned to me that you're working on this, on what seems like maybe it's like a digital version of a guidebook or something, the Sloper app.
Yeah. So I've been working recently with an app company. A Canadian company's made a really awesome climbing guidebook app, and I've been working with him on the development of the app, the features, the way it works, just providing feedback. Then they do all the work, obviously. But we're starting to release several of my guidebooks through the app. Okay. So yeah, Sloper.
So people will just be able to install the app, and then they'll get what they would get if they bought your guidebook separately, or?
Yeah, it's smartphone app. It uses the quality curated content that we have in the guidebooks. It's got the topo photos, and the lines come up, and you can click on the lines, and all sorts of navigational things that you can do on an app. Like, it's not just a website where it won't work if you're not online. It's downloaded, so it'll work anywhere. But the navigation is designed for a smartphone. So you're not just trying to navigate web pages. It works. Really
so you can use the navigation on your smartphone to, say, find a crag and walk.
So I mean navigating the app.
Oh, you mean navigating the app. Okay,
yeah. But they are talking and working on ways to actually use the smartphone to navigate you to the crag. We've got the guidebook maps on the app, so you can use those. But it'll also have Google Maps, and it'll also have other features for navigation as well. So it's at the point now where we're probably, by the time this podcast goes to air, we will have released the Southeast Queensland guidebook on the app and the Grampians guidebook. And then over the next while, we'll look at putting some other guidebooks available that way. So the idea is you've got quality route descriptions. You can record and tick and, record your ascents or attempts, whatever. And then there's a social interaction community side of it as well.
Oh, so you can record your ticks and use it as kind of your way to...
And you can follow people and have,
And is it crowdsourcing? Do people contribute?
No, well, people can put comments on there. So that way you can give information to the authors, and we're going to be giving my authors and contributors to the guidebook access to the back end, so they can edit route descriptions and information, so that'll come through, be pushed out to the smartphone. But users won't be able to just edit a description, but they can write a comment, and then an editor will decide whether that information goes in or how that information should go in. So the whole idea is to maintain high quality curated content and not let anyone just bring the whole thing down to the lowest common denominator and just get in there because they've got some personal issue or the bandwagon they're trying to push. And start mucking with the quality of the information.
Over your career, you've worked, capturing photography and film and other things on some amazing projects. A lot of these times, these international climbers come to Australia, and you film them. You did some filming of La Dura Dura for when Adam Ondra sent that. You get this exposure to all these elite level climbers. Is there anything that you've kind of like particularly observed with the climbers at that level that you could share with us?
Well, I've been very privileged to work with many of these people, and I find climbing just interesting, like as a metaphor for life in many ways, and the climbing community is kind of a microcosm of the broader community, and so it's kind of interesting because a lot of really high-end, well-known climbers are sort of seen as role models or brand ambassadors, and as you get to know them, you realise it's a bit more complex than that, and that there's a whole spectrum of people. And the ones I really admire are, people like Chris Sharma and Steve McClure, who are not only just absolutely brilliant climbers, but absolutely positive people doing really good things for the community. Chris is always just putting out positive vibes. It's no skin off his nose to up somebody else. And Steve McClure is just super, he's such a player, and so I really admire people like that. And I've I encountered people whose character is not always the greatest, and yet they might be really worshipped as stars in the sport. And so I think people's character I find very interesting. Climbing can bring that out, whether it's people are really solid character or whether none of us are perfect, but you do see some stuff which I've seen some stuff over the years which does make me wonder, whether it's people being sexist or misogynistic or just downright dishonest or whatever. And I don't want to dwell on it because it's definitely a negative, but it exists. So
do you find that hard, like conflicting, because you have to kind of take photos of these people and present them in the best possible light from a physical aspect, but then you see that in the back?
Well, I certainly don't go out of my way to work with people who I don't respect.
Yeah, okay.
So there's a better degree of self-censorship that goes on
there.
And I've sometimes worked with people and then over time learnt more about them and sometimes regretted the time I've spent. But by and large, I gravitate to working with more and more positive people over the years, and so that's fine. I mean, one of the things I've really tried to do over the years is work with as many different people as possible. Like one of the things I'm most proud about with my Australia book is I've got 230 different climbers that I photographed in that book. So I'm trying to work with as many different people as possible, capture a broad spectrum of the community. I not just work with the top end climbers and put them up on a pedestal, because there's so many people out there doing really cool stuff. It doesn't have to be the really strong climbers that get all the glory.
You're married to a particularly strong climber, Monique Forestier. Am I pronouncing the surname correctly?
Forestier, yeah, that's right.
Oh, good. She's a very accomplished Australian climber and quite focused in her climbing. What's it like to, I guess, be? Many of us sit in the other seat, but what's it like to be in that position where you're in a relationship with someone who is quite intently focused on climbing?
It's actually kind of cool. I mean, okay, I'm very busy with my business, and Meg's very busy with her climbing and her coaching business. So we've got a lot to juggle there, and we have a family. We've got a 10-year-old daughter, Coco. She's amazing and been a fantastic, addition to our lives. And so Monique and I, we have to work things out so that we both get to achieve and pursue our own dreams and goals. I'm forever indebted to Monique for all the help and support she gives me with my business and the different books and guidebooks that I've done. That just wouldn't have happened without her support. So in turn, I'm more than happy to support her with her climbing. And yeah, she's extremely driven and focused, and she's not getting any younger. The things she's trying to achieve with her climbing are not getting any easier. So I'll let it. We used to often go off as a family for months at a time to Spain or somewhere. Now we kind of juggle it a bit more with our daughter. I'll let Monique, she'll go to Spain for 6 weeks, and then she'll let me go to somewhere for a month to work on a guidebook or to do some photography or something. So, yeah, we work it out, but it's good. One of the best things is Monique is really inspired about climbing, really motivated, and I find that really motivating. And for myself, I keep up with my training more than I probably would. Monique's been taking some strength and conditioning classes lately, so I join in with that, and it's fun. Yeah. It helps. I'm 52, but hanging out trying to keep up with Monique a little bit helps me keep my hand in a bit with my own climbing.
Because you still climb today.
Yeah, no, not like what I used to, but I still climb. And that's the great thing about climbing. You can do it at whatever level you want or and still enjoy it. I'm aware that if I could lift my game a bit, there's always more routes that you're able to do, and you can enjoy the whole climbing thing a bit more if you're climbing better. So there's always that motivation to get better, but at the same time, I know there's a lot of moderate classic routes out there that I can just go and have a great time on. That's actually one of the best things about working on a guidebook, that you just get so inspired about all these great routes out there that you want to do.
What about the Australian climbing media landscape? Like, what are some of your thoughts and observations on that?
Well, it's certainly changing, and that's good. Change is good, I think. And it's before, years gone by, we only had one magazine, Rock Magazine, and I guess there was always some underground magazines. I was actually involved with a project called Crux Magazine some years ago, which was very cool. We got several issues of a print magazine out there, which were really cool. But yeah, I think there's certainly room for. I'd actually like to see like a central place for Australian climbing media, because at the moment, if there's an issue or some news, how do you find out about that? Like, not everyone's on Facebook, and even then, it's hit and miss what groups you might be following. We haven't really got a magazine that's covering climbing throughout Australia objectively in every respect. So yeah, I'd like to see something more central. I think what you're doing with this podcast is really cool, and I hope you'll interview lots of different people from all sorts of views and places, and not just the same old people over again. Or you can.
So you don't want to come back for a second podcast?
You can come
is that
back
what
and
you're
have me for a
saying?
second time. But I think there's a lot of other people who deserve a shot first. So.
Indeed. Yeah. What do you see as the main issues facing climbing these days?
Well, right now climbing is undergoing tremendous growth, because of the gyms, the Olympics, and climbing is just a lot more accessible now outdoors than it was, and so that growth is the issue, I guess. Is it going to affect access? We've got to make sure that it doesn't. We also need to make sure people are educated, understand concepts like personal responsibility, and that's a really hard concept to understand. It's very easy to point fingers and blame, but if you're lying on the ground in pieces, you've got to take responsibility for your decisions that led to that situation. I've experienced it, and it's really hard. So yeah, personal responsibility, safety, education, access. We in New South Wales, we don't have an access body. I mean, the Sydney Rock Climbing Club are really trying to get things going there, because if we had a major access problem here at the moment, then we're not very well equipped to deal with it. And in Queensland and Victoria, they're well ahead of us here. I mean, we've got access problems in the Grampians at the moment. We need to be prepared as a community to look after our interests
and deal with that. Yeah.
Deal with that stuff. And so, I mean, in climbing, we have this culture of being a bit irreverent and sort of sticking it up authority and being a bit rebellious and stuff. And that was very cool when I was growing up in the 80s and stuff. And now climbing's grown to the extent that it's a bit harder to just continue on like that. It's not it's not very helpful anymore. I mean, there's kind of a tall poppy aspect to that, where people in Australian climbing have been serious and doing really cutting edge things have often been dragged down, which is not a positive. But I think, there's bigger issues too now that we need to be ready for as a community.
Yeah. You've travelled a lot, obviously, and you get to experience these cultures around the world, different climbing cultures in different areas, particularly when you spend extended periods of time somewhere making a guidebook. Is there anything that kind of then stands out when you look at Australian climbing culture that makes Australian climbing culture particularly unique and Australian?
Oh, there'd be that irreverence thing I touched on. It would... Australian climbing culture has got that element of just taking the piss out of people that take themselves too serious, or authority figures. Part of the culture is to undermine them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because now, as a guidebook publisher and author and photographer, I guess I could be seen to be a bit of an authority figure, and there's certainly people who've had shots at me over different things over the years, often quite unreasonably, I feel. And it's funny because I grew up in that culture. I see it. I understand it. But I can play the game too. I'm not stupid. I've been around. So it's kind of, okay, it works both ways, fellas. Yeah. But, I don't know. What am I saying here? I think we've outgrown that a bit.
Yeah. So when we arc back to the beginning, you started photography with this dream to travel the world, and you were going to be on beaches taking photos and so forth, and now you're traveling the world. It's not beaches but are you living the dream? Have you built this dream up for yourself over time? Do you feel that you've got to that?
I've created a shitload of work for myself. I mean, I have been living the dream for many years. I think, as the guidebook side of the business has become more important, and probably the last few years I've slackened off a bit on my photography a bit, and I kind of want to focus on that, because I still have things with my photography I want to do over the next few years. And hopefully I've got the guidebook situation under control, because I feel a real responsibility. Like, I feel like I dug myself a big hole by getting into guidebooks. It's like, now I've got into them, I need to sort of make sure the quality is there. And so they just take up more and more time, and that's distracting. But it is a dream. But I work really hard with the different projects. But, I've had a great life and some great opportunities, because I've just gone after my dream, and I do consider myself very lucky to have had that opportunity. And I'm really glad that when I was 25, I just went for it, or 26. I went after my climbing, and then I went after my photography, and 25 years after starting the business, I'm still going, and there's lots of opportunities. Monique and I started a side business recently called climbingaustralia.com.au. And that's a business that we started to cover Monique's outdoor coaching, because she coaches indoors. She's New South Wales state coach, but she does some outdoor as well. Some trips we might run, like hosting some climbing trips, or some workshops we might run, and maybe I might do some photography workshops and stuff. There's just so many opportunities in climbing at the moment. It's really interesting time to be involved in this, and so I don't see myself slowing down.
I hope you all enjoyed that interview. Thanks to Simon for sitting down with me to share those stories and experiences. Over on thelayback.com, you can find links to Simon's website for Onsight Photography and to the other projects he talked about in the interview. Thanks again to everyone out there for sharing the podcast around on social media, for liking it, for sending me all the positive feedback about the podcasts that have come out so far. It's really appreciated. Also, get online and join your local peak climbing body in your state. If you're in Queensland, that's ACAQ. You can donate to them. In New South Wales, it's the Sydney Rockies. In Victoria, it is the VCC and Cliff Care. There's a lot of access issues going on in a couple of states at the moment, and those organizations need our support. If you climb outside, I think have a responsibility to kind of contribute and put something back in. And that's just one thing that you can do. Now, wherever you're headed to climb today, may your falls be clean and the catches soft. May that hold your lunging fall be a bucket. And may you latch it anyway, even when it's not. To take us out, here's an interesting clip of Simon explaining to an ABC News interviewer how climbing photography actually works.
He's climbed some of the most recognised challenges in the world, 18 countries, and documented them with his camera. And he joins us now. Simon Carter, thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Andrew.
How most climbers, obviously, well, all climbers, need two hands to climb.
Yeah.
You're using a camera. How do you do it with obviously holding one hand with the camera and another hand trying to hold on to the cliff?
Yeah, well, no, you can't do that, obviously. So often we climb around to the top of the cliff or something, and I set up an abseil rope, a static rope, and abseil down, and then I have these clamps that lock off onto the rope, and I can hang back and start to operate my camera and take photos of the climbers as they come up. So there's often a lot of rigging involved, getting the ropes in position so that I can be in a stable position and safe. And yeah, that's half the work or 90% of the work is getting the ropes rigged properly.
And having said that, you have a fear of climbing, or is it a fear of heights?
I don't have a fear of heights so much. I mean, I think we've all naturally got a fear of heights, but if you're doing it a lot, you sort of overcome that. I have a fear of falling and dying, I guess, and so I'm very careful to make sure that doesn't happen.
Well, I'm sure all climbers would have that sort of fear. I mean, they've obviously got to be safe in what they're doing, but you say you take those precautions, yet you get some spectacular results.
Yeah.